Hi there, this is Danny Flexen. Welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut ReFLEXions. We're here every Monday, 4:30 PM, usually to review the boxing action of the weekend just gone. But this week's going to be slightly different in that, as exciting or not as Danny Garcia's win over Ivan Redkach was, it's not really enough there to talk about for 7 minutes, I'm afraid. And at least not for me. It certainly hasn't inspired me. And if you've watched the fight, maybe hasn't inspired you either. So instead, I'm going to reflect upon some of the interviews I did last week. We went down to the Peacock Gym on Friday to speak to trainer Mark Tibbs and his stable, minus Dillian Whyte, of course, who isn't often in the Peacock, does a lot of his training up in Loughborough, of course. So we went down to speak to Mark, and we spoke to, and you'll see all these on the channel, of course, John Harding Jr., Charlie Duffield, Ben Jardine, who's a reality star who I admit I hadn't heard of before I met him on the day, but has been given a licence by Bieber, good old Bieber, and is looking to fight other reality show stars, which I have no real problem with. So we spoke to them, and Harvey Horn, of course, who is hoping to target a big domestic clash with Sonny Edwards this year, although I'm not sure how keen Sonny is, depending on what money he's offered. I know he responded to our video of Harvey Horn on Twitter, or the fact that it was coming out on Twitter, saying, well, they have to pay me now. So let's see what happens there. But speaking to Mark Tibbs, it was really interesting because he did talk about Dillian Whyte, even though he wasn't there. And just talked about the Marius Vac performance in December and Whyte being overweight for that, but also how the long hiatus after the Oscar Rivas fight and the problems with UCAD only recently sorted out just before the Vac fight, how that had affected Whyte's mindset and how it had led to maybe not committing 100% in the gym as he normally does. So that was kind of interesting. And also Tibbs was saying that, you know, Povetkin and Andy Ruiz Jr., whoever it is, they'll have an approach ready in time. He said they're not the most tricky of styles to prepare for, even though they're not similar to each other. They're not the most tricky styles overall. So he wasn't worried about the fact that the opponent had yet to be confirmed, even though Whyte is already in training camp. So we had a really good chat with Mark, and some of that's already out on the channel. The rest of it will be out hopefully later this week. But while we were at the Peacock Gym, just chatting away, I happened to see a large shadow looming on the periphery and eventually walking past. And that was Daniel Dubois, not dressed in one of his sharp suits as we've become used to seeing at press conferences, but in training gear. If you go to Peacock Gym and you're lucky enough to see Daniel Dubois, who's obviously growing as a star in the heavyweight division, you've got to at least try and get an interview with him. So I text his trainer, Martin Bowers, believing he was there for a training session, and attempted to set up the interview while we were there. Martin did arrange it, it was all fine, but he wasn't actually there for training. He was doing a photo shoot for BT Sport. Not, I should say, for the Joe Joyce fight, hasn't been confirmed yet, but just general freshen up pictures, according to Frank Warren of Queensbury Promotions, because the last pictures they had of Dubois were when he was much younger and probably a little bit leaner as well. He's growing into quite the monster, it's fair to say. British and Commonwealth champion, Daniel Dubois. And he seemed, surprisingly, I have to say, quite happy to do an impromptu interview. He's not always the happiest to do scheduled interviews. He's quite a shy character. Maybe not even shy, but just the quiet type, prefers to, cliche alert, let his fists do the talking. But he is getting better at that side of things, and that's kind of the major reflection of this week, I think, is that A, he seemed to embrace the opportunity to speak his mind, but B, and you'll see this in the interviews, the one about Anthony Joshua and about Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder rematch is already on the channel. The one about him and Joe Joyce is going up tomorrow evening, so Tuesday evening. But you'll see that he's a lot more comfortable in front of the camera, giving more thoughtful, lengthy answers to questions as well. And it's much needed, you know, it's all very well looking explosive and dynamic in the ring, but you need a bit of personality outside the ring as well. And most of the top superstars of the last 10, 20 years have had that. And I think it's growing in Dubois. We've got to remember, he turned pro at a very, very young age, and he's still quite a young man. He's been kind of looked after by his close-knit support network throughout his life, mainly his family, his dad especially, and his brother and his sister both box as well. And he's had that kind of protection, and he hasn't been kind of exposed to the kind of harsh side of boxing in terms of either the business side or the media spotlight and the negative side of that. So he's kind of coming out of his shell a bit, and I think that will continue to grow. Be nice to him if you get the chance. Other interviewers or fans, don't scare him off. Don't ruin it for all of us. He's just starting to, come out of that shell, and we want to keep it that way. But yeah, the kind of key headlines, and you'll see this in the videos, is that he really wants the Joyce fight next. He doesn't see any area where Joyce is superior to him, except for perhaps experience. And he's just really keen to keep progressing. He and Frank Warren have both talked about having a world title shot by the end of this year, 2020. And he's keen to do it. I think the fact that we've seen Joshua lose, surprisingly, back in June to Ruiz before regaining the belts, the fact that Wilder and Fury drew, and people find it hard to pick the winner of the rematch, and Dubois found it difficult himself, just shows that, even at the very top level, the heavyweight division is still, while not wide open, it's certainly competitive. And Warren said before he'd have no qualms about putting Dubois in with either Joshua or Dillian Whyte right now. Now, that might be a bit of promoter hyperbole, of course. But certainly by the end of the year, if a win over Joyce is added to the Dubois ledger, I wouldn't worry too much about putting him in at that level. I mean, it's all very well wanting more seasoning. He is still very young. But if he's there, if the talent's there, he's ready and he's done the rounds, and I don't think he'll be blasting Joyce out in the first 1 or 2 rounds. What a statement it would be if he did, but I think even if he wins, that fight goes quite long. If he's ready, then why not? Let's usher in a new heavyweight era with a young heavyweight champion in the same way we did when Joshua first won the title. That'd be really great to see. I'm certainly a believer in Dubois, at least so far. His fundamentals are sound. He's fluid, and he's very composed and poised in the ring. And you don't often see that with someone who's had quite an abbreviated amateur career like he has and turned pro quite young. But yeah, we hope he goes from strength to strength. But I've got a lot of time for Joe Joyce as well. And in a way, although it's good for the sport, in a way, I hope they don't fight next, because I find it very hard to kind of favour either of the two of them. But yeah, look forward to the next part of that Daniel Dubois interview. That'll be out tomorrow evening, Tuesday evening. I'll be back next week for the next ReFLEXions, which might be a more typical one, Monday, 4:30, and this Thursday, ReFLEXpectations, 4:30 p.m. Thanks very much for your time. Always a pleasure, and I'll speak to you soon. Please comment below as well. Tell me what you think about Dillian Whyte and Daniel Dubois.